Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and in this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. First, let's talk about the northern direction, about the group of forces north. The Russians continue the clearing operation along the border, trying to discover and to destroy as many as possible positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the most important, to destroy as many as possible FPV drone operators' positions. On this video we can see another building that Ukrainians were using as a small base, and that building was destroyed. On the road between Belgrade itself and Kharkiv, the Ukrainians started establishing and start creation of fortifications. The Russians tried to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities and, of course, to force them to fall back from the first defense belt along the border. So very likely in the very near future we're going to see the first attempts of the armed forces of Russian Federation to increase and to create a small buffer zone from 1 to 5 kilometers along the border. It's going to be like the first steps, so the first activity of newly created forces, just to understand their possibilities, just to get the soldiers and forces into the military, let's say, situation, to start getting experience. Now we are moving further to the line of combat contact, and we are going to talk about Chasiv Yar, because we received significant number of updates from this area, from the eastern part, and according to information we have, the Russians managed to encircle, more precisely to establish complete fire control over the main supply roads that goes from the central and the western part of Chasiv Yar to the eastern part of Chasiv Yar, and the Ukrainians who are currently located in this part of Chasiv Yar basically were encircled by the Russians as a result of clashes that took place during the previous few days. Currently, we can't tell for sure the exact number of Ukrainian soldiers who are stuck in this area, but there are a few important things, that mainly there are forces of 67th Brigade and other squads and other, let's say, platoons of the armed forces of Ukraine. And as we discussed in the previous update, currently there are purge in Ukrainian army. The Zelensky office start purging and clearing of the, let's say, commanders of 25th Air Mobile Brigade and 67th Brigade as well. 25th Air Mobile Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, whose fighters from several battalions recently surrendered as prisoners, about 200 people, will be disbanded, according to information we have. And the same story is going to take place with the 67th Brigade, and the reason why the Ukrainians are planning to disband the 67th Brigade is that they left their positions in the eastern Chasiv Yar with significant number of armored vehicles, equipment, and so on. The question is why the forces of 67th Brigade decided to abandon their positions in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. First of all, there is a conflict between these forces of the 67th Brigade and Syrsky himself, because 67th Brigade is the national brigade. The base of the core of this brigade is the forces and the soldiers of the right sector, or in Russian, Pravy sector. And this Pravy sector is considered and discovered as a terrorist organization in Russian Federation. And Syrsky himself, he has the Russian roots, so he's more Russian than Ukrainian when talking about roots. So there is a conflict between him personally and this brigade, probably based on his nationality. And that's why very likely Syrsky decided to send the 67th Brigade in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar to fight with the Russians, and probably to fight till the last soldier of this brigade. And when the Ukrainians of 67th Brigade realized that they're about to be encircled by the Russian forces, they decided to fall back, and they basically left their positions. So that's why now there is a conflict between two forces, between the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, let's say Commander-in-Chief, and the forces, the brigade itself. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they started spreading the information among the soldiers of the eastern Chasiv Yar, and they're starting sending messages to their relatives, to their wives, to their parents of the soldiers who are stuck and who are currently encircled in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. And what they're saying, the Russians are saying in the lists and the papers and the applications they try to spread among the personnel and among the parents and families, your commanders have already abandoned you, having fled to western part or even in the direction of Konstantinovka. Russia continuously strikes, recording Ukrainian movements. Ukrainians will all die ignorantly on Russian soil. Ukrainians have the only chance to save their lives. You're deserting, to surrender, hiding in the basements without civilians close to the battle line, block the entrances so that your own people don't drag you out, give us the coordinates, all right, when your troops retreat from the area directly on the door, we surrender, we are at this amount of people.
of the basements, description, number, weapons, communications. Wait for our troops to arrive. Strictly follow the instructions or our arriving fighters. So that was something like an ultimatum to the Ukrainian soldiers in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. This is the cauldron. This is not like a classical cauldron when we can find the Russian soldiers behind Ukrainian positions, but this is the cauldron in the way that most of the supply roads were already cut by the Russians. So very likely today, tomorrow, the day after, we're going to receive the final updates about the Russian control over every single, let's say, building and every single square meter on the Russian side of the, let's say, canal, and then the Russians will start the flanks maneuvers in the central part of Chasiv Yar itself. So very soon all these things are going to start happening. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians, of course, regarding the situation, regarding the negotiations with the, let's say, surrounded and encircled soldiers, continue clearing the operation of the flanks, continue pummeling and destroying Ukrainian positions in Kalinovka, in the western Chasiv Yar, and so on. Now we are moving further to Avdiivka direction. We have lots of updates. The sources, the mappers, continue updating their maps, showing additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation along the railways in direction of Ocheretina, and today the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit further to the west of the railways in direction of the main supply road between Novobakhmutovka and Berdachi. So for now we can't tell for sure according to geolocation whether the Russians managed to cut the road or not, but the Russians are so close to road, the Russians are so close to the area, so we can make a conclusion that very likely the Russians have already cut the main supply road, and now the Ukrainian forces who are currently located in Berdachi, if there are anyone there left, currently encircled by the Russians. So once again, I expect that within the next 48 hours, the Semyonovka and Berdachi will be completely captured by the Russians. Umanovka, Yasnobrodovka, Semyonovka, Nitailova area, we haven't received anything from the direction, just to report that the Ukrainians are planning to disband the forces of 25th Air Mobile Brigade because that some, let's say, 20 soldiers, more than up to one battalion, surrendered to the Russians after they refused, Ukrainians refused to send evacuation to them. And now we are moving to Krasnohorivka. We continue receiving significant number of very interesting updates. The Ukrainians tried to counterattack, but probably they stopped these attempts. Now the Ukrainians are just trying to bomb and attack the Russian positions with artillery strikes, trying to destroy their buildings, and the most important, trying to slow the Russians down. Because now it's like obvious facts, it's like the mass situation. The Ukrainians are no longer available to force the Russians to fall back from the southeastern part of Krasnohorivka, and the thing is that now the Ukrainians also are no longer available to slow down and to stop the Russians. During the previous weekend, the Russians managed to improve their positions in Krasnohorivka, and the Russians managed to capture this short, let's say, building, this short area, this small area, tree lines, some buildings, and so on. So as you can see, the Russians continue developments. Furthermore, some Russian mappers have already updated their maps, showing that this part of Krasnohorivka is also under complete Russian control. For now, we haven't received any geolocations or confirmations about this, but I believe that this is something like this, and this is true, and we can, let's say, trust this piece of information. We will adjust, of course, only after we receive some geolocations confirming this, but it's very likely that this is approximately the situation of the direction. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and, let's say, striking on Ukrainian positions in the western part of the south in Krasnohorivka, which is like artillery preparation due to the heavy fire. So very likely also the Russians will continue their offensive further to the west on the southern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the Krasnohorivka that located on the southern part of the railways. So the main Russian goal, at least at this stage of the storm of assault of Krasnohorivka, is to establish control over everything to the south of this white line, and then the Russians, of course, will start offensive to the next defense, to the next supply road that goes from, let's say, the central part of Krasnohorivka to, let's say, the mainland along Lazova and down to Kurakhova and so on. So they will do something like this, and this is going to happen very soon. Now we're moving to Novomykhailivka area. We have additional reports, additional updates. According to different mappers, the Russians during the previous weekend managed to improve their positions along these three lines, managed to shorten the line of combat contact, and to get as close as possible to two additional Ukrainian strongholds roads on the northern part of Novomykhailivka. And of course, the Russians are saying that after very heavy pressure, after very heavy artillery preparations, the Ukrainians abandoned their positions from this network of fortifications, and very likely the upcoming days the Russians will establish complete control at least over this part of Novomykhailivka, or something like this. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the deep rear between Kurakhova and Ugledar. A few more, let's say, positions were bombed and destroyed by the Russian aviation. A few more positions were destroyed. Few more artillery systems were destroyed in the same direction. So the process is ongoing. The Russians are not planning to stop. Velika Novosilovka, no changes, and interesting details are coming from Gulyai-Polye. The Russians, after a very short operational pause, continue bombing and attacking the area with FPV drones. During the previous weekend, the Russians mainly were concentrated on the communication equipment, radars, and on the, let's say, anti-tank positions and so on Ukrainian artillery systems. So there's like a long-range superiority, long-range suppression of Ukrainian positions, and everything is coming probably to the another ground operation. So if we increase the number of days since the beginning of April, we're gonna see a very big, very concentrated Russian fire in Gulyai-Polye, in the village by the name of Zaliznichne. Gulyai-Polye itself is under very heavy fire. I remind you that this month the Russians destroyed the bridge between one side of another, and of course Malinovka is usually under very heavy Amur missile strikes. So the concentration is very big on this X, let's say, and very likely the Russians do have some plans, but the question is when exactly they're planning to start implementation of possible operation on the direction. Few more FPV drone strikes and Lancet strikes on the, let's say, western Zaporoizhzhia direction, but without any changes or any operations on the ground. So this is the situation on the morning of the 15th of April of 2024. We expect a lot of very interesting updates for today. So let's wait, let's see. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.